I never thought a single dinner conversation could shatter the life I believed I had, but that night, sitting across from my husband and his friends, I heard every word he said about me, words he thought I couldn't understand because he didn't know I spoke Japanese. My heart didn't just break, it collapsed in on itself, like something inside me gave up all at once. I remember staring at my plate, holding my breath so no one would see the way my hands shook, wondering how long he had felt that way about me, and how many times he had hidden behind a language he assumed was safe. That moment changed everything, our marriage, my trust, the way I saw myself. And if you've ever discovered the truth in a place where you expected kindness, you'll understand exactly what I felt. If this story resonates with you, feel free to support the channel with a like and subscribe. It truly helps me share more real stories like this. I never meant to hide the fact that I could speak Japanese. It was simply a part of my life I rarely used anymore, a childhood language that had faded into the background as I built a new life in Canada. But as I sat at that dinner table, listening to my husband describe me in a way I had never heard before, something inside me snapped, not loudly, not visibly, but quietly, like a thread pulled too tight for too long finally breaking. I remember the clinking of glasses, the soft laughter around the table, and the warm glow of the restaurant lights that somehow felt harsh against my skin, and I kept wondering how I could be surrounded by people and yet feel so unbearably alone. Growing up, I learned Japanese because my grandmother insisted that I know the language of our family before anything else. She said it was the only way to understand the heart of the people who raised you. Back then, I didn't appreciate it, and after she passed, speaking Japanese felt painful, like reopening a wound I didn't know how to close. So when I met Daniel, I never brought it up. He knew I was half Japanese, of course, anyone could see it, but he assumed, like many do, that I only knew a few basic phrases. It never mattered, until the night it suddenly did. We had been married for 7 years, years I thought were steady, imperfect but safe, built on the kind of quiet companionship that comes from accepting each other's flaws. But looking back, I see how many small moments I brushed aside. The way he sometimes sighed when I asked a question twice, the way he joked about my soft voice, the way he told his friends I was too sensitive whenever I expressed hurt. I thought those were normal bumps in a marriage, signs of two people navigating life at different rhythms. But the dinner changed the meaning of all those moments. That night, his friends were visiting from out of town, 2 men he hadn't seen in years, and the mood was cheerful at first. They asked about our marriage, our plans, our day-to-day life, and I was smiling politely when the conversation shifted into Japanese. My heart stopped. They didn't know I understood. And Daniel, my husband, the man who held my hand every morning, didn't stop them. He didn't even hesitate. He said I was difficult to communicate with, that living with me was like constantly walking on eggshells, that I was overly emotional, not adventurous enough, and a bit of a burden when it came to social situations. His friends laughed gently, not cruelly, more like men who've heard this kind of thing 100 times from husbands who complain out of habit. But I sat there frozen, feeling a version of myself being described like a character in a story I didn't recognize. And when they asked why he stayed with me, he chuckled and said something that felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. Well, she's loyal. Quiet. Predictable. A man can build a peaceful life with someone like that. The word predictable echoed in my head long after the table erupted in soft laughter. I didn't know what hurt more, the fact that he said those things, or the way he sounded so casual, as if these thoughts were familiar to him, as if he'd rehearsed them long before this dinner. I kept my face still, my hands folded carefully in my lap, afraid that even the slightest movement would draw attention to the way my world was breaking apart. I didn't confront him. I didn't leave the table. I simply sat there feeling the life I knew slipping through my fingers. And later that night, when we got home, he wrapped his arms around me and kissed my cheek as if nothing had happened, as if the woman at the dinner and the woman standing in our kitchen were two entirely different people. I lay awake for hours wondering how long he had felt this way, how many other conversations he had shared in that language he assumed was secret, how many opinions he kept hidden behind the safety of words he thought I could never understand. Part of me wanted to pretend I never heard it, to bury the pain the way I buried my grandmother's language years ago, but something inside me refused. This time, the wound didn't close. It demanded to be felt. And by the time the sun rose, I knew this wasn't just a crack in our marriage. It was the beginning of something much deeper, something I wasn't ready to face, but could no longer avoid. The morning after that dinner felt strangely quiet, as if the house itself sensed the shift between us. Daniel brewed coffee like he always did, humming softly under his breath, completely unaware that the ground beneath our marriage had cracked open. I watched him as he moved around the kitchen, wondering how many times I had mistaken routine for love, how many moments I had seen as tenderness when really they were simply habits carried out by a man who no longer saw me the way he once did. Part of me wanted to confront him right then, to say everything I heard, to watch his face as the truth landed, but another part of me was terrified of what he might say if he no longer had to hide behind the Japanese he assumed I didn't understand. So instead, I stayed silent. For days. I walked around our home like a guest, noticing things I had never paid attention to before, the way he avoided eye contact when he was distracted, the way he listened half-heartedly when I spoke, the way he smiled a little too easily at his phone. None of it was dramatic. It was the quiet erosion that frightened me most. In the evenings, I'd sit in the living room with my tea, staring at the shelves lined with memories, our wedding photo, our first trip to Vancouver Island, the framed ticket from the jazz show he took me to on my birthday. They all felt like artifacts from someone else's life. And as the days passed, I realized I was waiting, not for an apology, but for the moment when the version of our marriage I'd been clinging to would finally crumble. It came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, I got a call from my aunt in Tokyo. She rarely phoned, and hearing Japanese spoken with her soft, familiar accent felt like being pulled back into a part of myself I thought I had lost. I stepped outside so Daniel couldn't hear, and as I spoke to her, something inside me clicked into place. I had spent so many years trying to mold myself into the kind of woman I thought he wanted, quiet, calm, agreeable, that I had slowly erased pieces of myself without noticing. When I came back inside, Daniel looked up from the couch and asked, almost casually, "Who were you talking to?" I said, "My aunt." He nodded, turned his attention back to the TV, and I added, "We spoke in Japanese." For the first time in days, he really looked at me. His eyes narrowed just slightly, confusion flickering across his face as he asked, "You speak Japanese?" The silence that followed felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. I nodded, feeling a strange steadiness rise in me, the kind that comes when you're too tired to pretend anymore. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, searching for something to say, but the truth was already hanging between us. I saw the exact moment he understood. And in that instant, he tried to mask the panic with a weak smile, saying, "Well, guess that's something we should have talked about earlier." But there was no warmth in his voice, no attempt to bridge the distance between us, just a thin layer of discomfort barely covering his fear that the things he said at dinner were no longer hidden. That night, he became unusually attentive, offering to cook, asking about my day, complimenting the smallest things. It would have been sweet if it hadn't felt like a desperate attempt to undo something that couldn't be undone. I watched him move around the kitchen, fumbling through forced gestures of affection, and I felt a wave of sadness wash over me, not anger, not betrayal, just a deep sorrow for the marriage I had believed in. The next weekend, he suggested we go out, just the two of us, but even then I felt like we were acting in a play neither of us had rehearsed. I kept hearing his voice from that dinner, those quiet criticisms spoken with the ease of someone who had said them before. And when he reached across the table to hold my hand, I felt nothing but distance. The turning point came late one evening when he tried to joke lightly, saying, "I hope you didn't hear anything embarrassing the other night." He meant it as a tease, but the words hit me like ice water. It confirmed everything. He didn't regret what he said, he only regretted being exposed. I stared at him, realizing how much energy I had spent trying to protect a version of us that only existed in my imagination. Something inside me shifted. Not a dramatic explosion, not anger, just quiet clarity, the kind my grandmother used to call the moment when the heart stops lying to itself. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't break down or yell. I simply sat there, knowing that the woman he described at that dinner wasn't me, and that the man sitting across from me no longer felt like my partner. And as I went to bed, lying beside him in the same room, but an entirely different world, I understood that the most painful part wasn't what he said. It was realizing how long I had ignored the signs. The next step I knew wouldn't be simple. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to strength forming in the quiet spaces where my hurt used to be.